everybody, and welcome to AWS Tech Chat. Normally we come to you via the podcast. Now, I'm Dr. Pete, and with me I have...
Dean Samuels. Pleasure to be here, Dr. Pete.
Dean's flown down all the way from Hong Kong.
And it looks like a rundown from Hong Kong.
You guys should see him close up. He is totally sweaty. We had to pat him down and put makeup on his face.
I must tell you, it's not nerves or anything. I actually had to run from the other side of the building to pick up a shirt. And I'm a guy that sweats. Look, I'm built like a rugby player, so I do sweat a bit.
That's right. You don't want to arm wrestle this guy at any point in time.
So I think I need a pat down, yes?
You do. Yes, I think you should. All right, while he's doing it, let me introduce the show, guys. So normally we've been doing the AWS podcast via audio, so we tickle your ears, but given that it's AWS Sydney Summit at the moment, we thought we'd actually pivot the show and do a live video stream. Dean, how do you feel about that?
I don't mind the live, just the video stream. You know, usually we do this over a podcast, just over audio. Sometimes we have an opportunity to do multiple takes.
Yeah.
This is going to be quite interesting, but I think we've got it sorted.
Hey, look, we got pretty good at the podcast. You know,
yeah,
in the past, when
we did one
started,
take, right?
That's right. We did a one take now. In the past, we used to do multiple breaks and edits. There is no stop, rewind, edit. So this is live. So if we screw anything up, hopefully it's going to be a bit of fun.
Right. And we're actually in the same building for once. So normally when we do the Tech Chat, we're in different countries, let alone different buildings.
That's right.
Where are we? What's happening?
We are actually in Sydney. So I flew up from Melbourne and you flew down from Asia.
From Hong Kong, yes.
Indeed. Mm-hmm. So we're actually here to host the very first episode of AWS Tech Chat TV. Now, by the way, we are not stopping the podcast, just to be clear, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is just another medium that we have an opportunity to communicate with you, our listeners and our viewers.
And you know, it's really interesting because about 2 years ago, I first started AWS Tech Chat. In the back room, we actually had a whole room full of bags. And I didn't even have a microphone when I was actually recording the episode. I actually used a little tiny webcam, so I grabbed the API product manager and the Lambda product manager, and we all three of us huddled over this tiny little microphone. So if you guys have been faithful listeners, you probably would have heard the first episode. The audio wasn't that great shot. So hopefully we're doing a lot better now.
Yeah, well, maybe you can tell the listeners and viewers, what was the thought process? Why create the Tech Chat?
Great, yeah,
podcast?
So great question, Dean. So, you know, you and I have seen many, many customers. In fact, we have, over
12 years between
12 years
us
of tenure
at AWS?
Yeah. So we've seen a lot of customers, and one of the constant feedbacks that we're getting is, can you guys tell us why? Demystify something. And as you guys probably know, we have daily features and services getting released, and it's really hard to keep up. So we've been kind of moderating via the Tech Chat program some of the really interesting things that you may want to focus on as a developer, infrastructure person, a security person, and curate that to give you some of the really punchy, the reason why you should do something, as opposed to just talking about how you should do it.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point. I mean, there's so much information over there, and customers, as well as solution architects,
Indeed,
can become really overwhelmed with all that information. So, you know, the Tech Chat is really an idea to not only just tell you about some of the new things that Amazon Web Services is doing, but really how that applies to you and how that applies to the real world, how it really solves those business problems. And that's what we're going to do today.
Indeed. So if you haven't heard the podcast, hop on Audible, hop on SoundCloud, or subscribe to AWS Tech Chat online, and we'll send you emails with regular updates as to when the next episodes are coming out.
Yep.
And in fact, we're now going to have this dual modality. We're going to have the audio, so we're going to tickle your ears, and now tickle your eyeballs with our makeup faces. Fantastic.
Sure. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's new. What's happened over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
It's weird to say that over the last couple of weeks there's so many things that's happened, right? But I guess in terms of talking about what's new and what we've actually released, I want to talk a little bit about how we at Amazon can really encourage that culture of innovation, really foster that innovation culture across the organization. So there's actually a few tenets that we actually work by, and some of our customers actually work by today.
They do, and in fact, we can do a visual joke now, because this isn't a podcast
Innovation Day, right?
Innovation Day. So this is really day one at the summit, and what we're doing is we've had a great lineup of speakers talking to our customers about how to do innovation. So you mentioned things about how we go about doing it. So at Amazon and AWS, we actually have this interesting process around innovation, and we call it working backwards, Dean.
Right, okay.
And the idea is, you know how you always have hindsight vision when you look back? It's kind of obvious how you got to a certain location or how you achieved a certain outcome. So with working backwards, we actually start off with writing a press release, Dean. And the idea of a press release is to actually visualize and capture the voice of the customer and put it in writing. And reach maybe 2 years out from today, and then look backwards.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned about focusing on the customer, and that's what day one means. focusing on the customer, right?
Indeed.
That press release is an interesting a way to do that, where we're really talking from the customer's point of view. Rather than we get into code, rather than we get into testing for those new ideas, we want to know about how this particular new idea is going to first benefit the customer before we actually put in investment and resources into that idea.
So we don't run any lines of code, we don't do anything until we have the press release. And then what we actually do is, so the press is about where you get to, it's a destination. Now, you know when you think about when you get to somewhere, you kind of go, I might get a plane, train, automobile, you might end up walking where you're going. Well, that's the idea of the next step, which is really about how do we do this? And that's where the frequently asked questions comes in. So we actually supplement the press release with the FAQ, and the FAQ covers a lot of the questions that come out of, once you've read the press release, how are we going to actually achieve this?
Absolutely.
It's a very important part of the working backwards process because it actually helps you to internalize that. And also what you do is you circulate this document around the organization and people get to contribute. So you actually evolve this over time. And quite often the FAQ, by the way, is what you'll end up seeing on the AWS website. For a new service, once we've actually released it, that FAQ that you read has a genesis back to the original FAQ.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also, one of the other, or a couple of the other tenets is around experimenting frequently. We're an organization that we want to check things very quickly. We either pivot, we either stop and focus on anything else, but we really lower that cost of failure, so to speak, right? We talk about moving fast, being nimble as well, because we want to iterate quickly. And we also do have this concept of a two-pizza team. Maybe explain what a two-pizza team means.
Yeah, it's really important. When you think about startups, you can see some really amazing startups who are tiny little organizations punching well and truly above, the weight limit that they're actually at. So the idea of a two-pizza team is once you've got this narrative written and you've had approval, people have read your FAQ, and you get the green light to go ahead and do something, we actually create a team. And the way we kind of structure the team is in the size of 2 pizzas. So generally the idea is that the team should be no bigger than what you can feed them with the 2 pizzas.
Is that right? So what if the two of us are on the same team?
We get really fat.
I think it's only a 2-man group, right?
That's right. And that's what happens, right? Day one, the person who's probably written a narrative, who's really passionate about getting this idea to market, is probably person 1, and then they go off and hire the entire team. And the idea of this size really is really interesting because psychologically, most people can't remember what the other folks are doing in the team. So once you get to the 14 plus team size, it becomes really hard to know what your buddies are actually doing. Your stand-ups take longer to run. It becomes a little bit more challenging. So the idea of the 2-pizza team really is around ensuring you've got the right size. And by the way, back of house, AWS and Amazon, we actually auto-scale our teams as 2 pizza-sized teams.
Right, absolutely. And this is all wrapped together, all the tenets we spoke about, by fostering that leadership, making everybody an owner of those ideas in those 2 pizza teams. We do that through our leadership principles, our Amazon leadership principles. I've been told there's 14 of them, is that right?
There are indeed, yeah.
And it ranges from things like ownership, which talks about how nothing is outside of our job role or our job scope. We don't talk about it's not my job. If you come up with that idea, you will own that end to end. You'll put that 2 pizza team together. Each one of those members will also be the owners as well. We've got things like Think Big. I love the Think Big leadership principle. Think Big is all about the fact that we will be misunderstood about ideas that we come out with. Who would have thought Amazon.com, an online bookseller all those many years ago in the 90s, moved to a cloud service provider?
And look, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If you think small, you will end up small. If you think big... Now, by the way, out of those LPs, the leadership, there are 14 of them, and what we call the bookends are customer obsession on one end and deliver results on the other. The other 12 in the middle is, I kind of look at it as it's a recipe for success. There's no guarantee it's going to work because you've got this tension between those leadership principles. So you mentioned think big, but you can think big, but you also want to dive deep to the level of detail. So as a leader, you want to see the big picture, but you don't want to get caught up in a detail about how you go about actually executing and delivering those results for customers.
Absolutely. We could talk all day about the leadership principles.
We certainly can, but this is tech
Let's
chat.
talk about the tech.
Yes, so we've had...
How do we innovate? What have we innovated over the last 2 weeks? What have we announced?
Lots and lots of things. So we're at the Sydney Summit, but let us dial the clock back to the San Francisco Summit, which only occurred just recently, and we had some really interesting announcements. Now, I know S3 is one of your favorite services, Dean.
Well, all of the announcements are my favorites. It's all infrastructure, right? I'm an infrastructure guy.
So and I'm a developer guy.
Lucky it's API-based, though, right?
It's all API.
Infrastructure as code.
It's just the way AWS is infrastructure as code, and you can put it into Git. That's my favorite line. So at the San Fran Summit, we actually made some key announcements. So Dean, do you want to share with our listeners and viewers now the S3 One Zone infrequent access, globally available right now.
What a mouthful. Absolutely. Do you follow Amazon S3 being a developer guy?
I do. I love S3. You can do your static website hostings. I can get notifications of people putting things into my buckets.
Yep.
I can get my Lambda functions firing up whenever an event occurs.
Backing up your Justin Bieber songs, your Britney Spears. I think you're like a country music fan as well, right?
Yeah. So, more like techno, I think.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm showing my age.
Interesting. I just got this picture in my mind. Anyway, back to the tech, S3. So, S3 was one of our first services that we launched back in 2006. Mm-hmm. What were the other two services? There were 3 that year.
They were. So, pop quiz for you guys. Anybody know? By the way, we're interactive, by the way, so put those answers in your chat, by the way, and the guys are going to respond to you. But they were actually EC2 and SQS, our queuing service. So these are the 3 oldest services that we've actually launched at day 1.
Right. And how many do we have now?
Well and truly over 100. Now, if you actually count them, it's way more than 100. Mm-hmm. But at the moment, we're kind of keeping it simple, triple digits, 100 plus services.
Yeah, absolutely. And on S3, basically when we had launched it, it was a storage service that would durably store content that was stored there. And the way we actually did that was we designed the platform to durably store the content across not only multiple devices in a single location or an availability zone, but actually across multiple availability zones. So in fact, the original S3 launch would actually store content durably across more than 3 availability zones. And this would actually then allow us to design the service with 11 nines durability.
So let's put that into perspective. And SLA is a commercial construct generally, right? But when you design something for durability, what does that 11 nines of durability mean for my Britney Spears albums?
And country music and Justin Bieber.
And my techno, Moby.
And that one techno song, right?
Right.
Anyway, so if you had 10,000 of those songs, which I'm sure you do, if you wanted to store that in S3, the chances of you losing that content forever is 1 in 10 million years chance of losing one object, one of those 10,000.
So Britney's got a long way to live.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. You're going to be comfortable with the plane home.
Okay, awesome.
So S3, we actually launched some additional storage classes. So we found that customers don't necessarily need that actual 3 availability zone type durability, that 11 nines durability.
Why is that?
Well, a lot of content can actually be regenerated if it is lost, or a lot of content might not need to be stored long term.
So you're transcoding stuff, multiple formats, like for video.
Absolutely. So we actually introduced the S3 One Zone infrequent access service at San Francisco Summit last week. Pretty obvious what it does, one zone. So rather than storing across 3 availability zones, it's actually 1 availability zone that it's available in. And so that brings us to 4 storage classes that are now available with the S3 service. So we have the S3 Standard, the S3 Infrequent Access, as the name suggests, when content is infrequently accessed. We're really creative with these names, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Then we have the S3 One Zone Infrequent Access, and then, of course, the Reduced Redundancy storage service.
Yeah, and the Reduced Redundancy set actually is 2 copies, right?
Yeah,
so we actually now got 1, 2, and more than 3.
Yeah, it's all about choice to the customer.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, and this is really it. I mean, the whole platform's about choice of operating system, programming language, and infrastructure choices.
Yep, absolutely.
Fantastic. So Dean, what about, can I change those if I'm on standard to one zone storage classes?
Absolutely. It's all about choice, right? And it's just an API call, so as a developer, you'd like that. So we basically have the ability to make that API call and not only move it across those 4 storage classes, but also into Glacier as well.
Fantastic,
so for that long-term archive type storage.
Frozen storage.
Frozen storage.
Right, awesome.
Glacier, another creative name.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so I spoke a lot about S3. Again, we can talk about this in a lot of detail. It was actually quite interesting. A few years ago, our CTO, Werner Vogels, how he likened S3 to the real world or to everyday life is that we've iterated and improved the S3 service over those, 12 years now, since 2006. Like you would actually upgrade a flying single-engine plane and do the upgrades of the engine to convert it into a 737 and then a 747 and even an Airbus whilst it's still flying.
That's what we've had to do. Land.
It's never down. It's never down. So S3 is the same thing. So all of these new services and features, we've actually made those upgrades whilst we still have it live online for all of our customers.
And it continues to grow every single day.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow.
All right, so what's next? What else did we announce last week?
Well, so Secrets. It's all about Secrets. So Secrets as a service, right? So we've released something called Secrets Manager. Now, Secrets Manager is a fantastic service that actually helps us to be able to maintain, rotate our credentials. Quite often people would store secrets inside a database, or perhaps if you've been using the AWS Simple Systems Manager, you can actually use Parameter Store to be able to store those particular items and then access them. Or, in your case, speaking of S3, you could use signed URLs to get access to your credentials.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've spoken to customers in the past about the most effective and secure way to store these long-term credentials. At the end of the day, we try to avoid having these long-term credentials because we do have those mishaps of maybe including those credentials in our code that get uploaded to a public repository. So we want to avoid that and really move to those short-term credentials or ones that are automatically rotated.
Exactly.
And so in the past, what customers would used to do is maybe store, like you said, in S3, but they'd have to rotate it manually themselves. There's services like the Parameter Store with the SSM, the Simple Service Manager, where customers could also store it, but again, would have to rotate it themselves.
So what's different here is this service is actually natively integrated with the Amazon IDS, so MySQL, Aurora, and Postgres. So the idea is that this takes care of everything automatically.
Absolutely.
So it's a great service. So speaking of security, Dean, I know you love security at the edge. So tell me about the AWS Firewall service that we also announced.
Let me prepare myself. Could wipe myself down.
You better wipe down.
Wipe myself down because this is an interesting topic, right? About AWS Firewall. So AWS Firewall, really a complementary service to a lot of our security tools. Now, a lot of you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, don't you have things like the security groups? The ability to set up, which we do, the ability to set up these firewall rules around your EC2 or VPC environments. Well, Firewall Manager is really a complementary service to that. It really relates to the AWS WAF, the Web Application Firewall Service.
And also helps enterprises a lot because if you got, generally if you have one account, this probably is not going to be as much value as if you had 100 or 1,000 accounts.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea is that from a central location, you can manage a lot of these, all of your web application firewall rules across these potentially many hundreds of accounts and different organizations as well. So you can roll out these changes very easily, regardless if you had that one account or, like we said, 100 accounts.
Right, so if you're getting DDoS from a particular country, for example, and you want all of your accounts, all of your CloudFront distributions, all of your ELBs to be actually protected, you can go into the service and across all of those accounts do it automatically as opposed to logging into every one of those accounts and running a script.
And exactly, and the thing is, don't think of it as a security person at a console rolling out these changes. It can all be automated and programmatically done.
Absolutely,
right?
Really, really important.
So we talk about the AWS Firewall Manager as an additional layer of security.
We do.
One of the things in the security realm is also around certificates. We use certificates for many purposes, for encryption, for authentication and verification. We actually released another feature of our Certificate Manager service. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So the Certificate Manager that you may have already used is able to deploy certificates to things like your CloudFront distributions, your API gateways, as well as your applications. So we've now also released on top of that another component of that, which is basically the private certificate authority. So if you want to run your own certificate authority, and by the way, we are a certificate authority, you can spin up your own instance of a security authority, and you can create, sign, distribute your own private certificates. So if you're a large organization, like a telco or a bank, or even a one-man startup, a very small two-pizza team, you certainly can actually create your own certificates and have them deployed into your applications so that you can actually either encrypt your information, both in flight, but also at rest.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a great extension to be able to do all the things that are really inaccessible for a lot of organizations because you have to go to a third party. Now we've basically allowed you to be able to do that yourself.
And that's one of the real benefits of this iteration of all of these new services and features, innovation. Actually, how many services and new features did we release last year? Can you remember, Dr. Pete?
1,430, dear. Are you testing my memory here on stage? Fantastic.
Absolutely. So that pace of innovation is quite rapid. The great thing I like about it, and you mentioned it just before, is regardless if you're that large enterprise organization or that small two-person shop, like you mentioned, those services, all the features we release are available to everyone.
Fantastic.
And talking about available to everyone, we actually made two more announcements last week related to our managed artificial intelligence services.
Yeah, so the services have gone, so Translate and Transcribe have actually gone live. So now they're generally available. So you don't actually have to sign up for private access to those, which is fantastic. Now, guys, we are getting very close to the end of the show, aren't we?
Yeah.
So what we wanted to do is take a question from the audience. And what have we got here, Dean?
Let's have a look.
I can't see anything.
I can't see a question. Oh.
All right.
Our brilliant moderators over there may have already answered that question.
Probably have.
So thanks, moderators.
So this is a new format, by the way. So every time you see us doing AWS Tech Chat TV, you will be able to interact with us via the chat window. So our guys are standing by and ensuring to make sure your questions are being answered. When we get a chance, we'll certainly answer the questions online.
Yep, absolutely.
Cool. So in the wrap-up.
Yep.
So guys, we are at the summit. We are about to wrap up this segment. However, make sure that you're here during the next couple of days. Mm-hmm. We will be doing more and more of these live streams throughout the next 2 days. We've got some special announcements.
We do, in fact. I'm looking forward to 2 key...
Which are these?
I wouldn't say... I want to keep it a surprise, but... Okay. Tune in if you're attending the summit to our keynote number 2 on Thursday.
Which is delivered by our co-host on Tech Chat.
Absolutely. Way to represent Ollie.
Yes.
So Ollie is actually going to talk about how artificial intelligence and machine learning is really disrupting across all industries and across all organizations. But he's going to talk specifically about some new announcements or new news during that keynote.
And also, if you're a partner, Adrian DeLuca, who was floating just by a few seconds ago, Adrian's going to be making some special announcements tomorrow for partners and some of the new programs that we're actually launching. So please, guys, stay tuned. There's a lot of interesting lineups coming up. And we hope you've actually enjoyed our very first inaugural AWS Tech Chat TV.
And I think you did mention it. So we've got the Tech Chat TV happening tomorrow and also on Thursday as well. So make sure to tune in then. And we'll actually recap some of the events that are happening here at the Sydney Summit.
Absolutely. So guys, stay tuned. We'll see you shortly. Hope you enjoy AWS Summit in Sydney in 2018. We'll catch you soon.
Awesome.
Bye
Have
for
a
now.
Good one.